This is Andrew Hada from Nothing Ventured Media. I want to tell you about all the feature films we've made and how you can see them right now. The last one is a zombie drama about how a pandemic and isolation could drive a group of people mad. When the virus hits, John finds himself alone and scared until he meets Michael, his protector. But when Karina, another survivor, enters the mix, everything that John and Michael knew will be turned on its head. The last one's is a zombie virus movie that's somehow even more relevant today. Plus, it has zombies. Check it out. Borderland is a mexploitation film about living in El Paso. When Sarah finds herself in debt to the cartels, she has until sunrise to find some missing monies with the help of her executioner. Borderland is a true midnight movie and a lot of fun. The documentary Humble Spirits tells the story of the Hahn family, including champion Jennifer Hahn from El Paso, Texas. The entire Hahn family has grown up in the combat sports and has helped shape who they are both in and out of the ring. Humble Spirits, a family of fighters, is the perfect documentary for boxing fans of all ages. Finally, The Empty Space, winner of multiple awards, including the Sacramento Horror Film Festival's Best of the Best, is a cosmic horror about Amy Andrews, who's dealing with anxiety and depression after a violent attack that killed her husband. As she tries to find herself, she starts to lose her grasp on reality. Or could it be something much more sinister? The Empty Space is full of twists and turns, with Grace DeWilder of Rue Morgue magazine calling it a powerful film full of excellent performances by practically every cast member. All of Andrew Hada's movies are available to rent or buy on streaming services such as Tubi, Amazon, and many other places. And if that's not enough for you, Hada Films is home to all of our short films. So take a look around and see what you like. Spend your day with Hada Films and Nothing Ventured Media. Now, let's start the bomb squad. What's up, guys? Welcome to the Bomb Squad. As you can see, I'm getting ready for Halloween, and also I have my closet open. Whoops, William is not here. It's all right. It's just Halloween boxes. William's not here. He's on vacation for the next 2 weeks. Today is just the boys. But you just finished watching our live episode on Howard the Duck. Hope you like that one because I got flashbacks with this movie we're covering today.
This isn't as bad as Howard the Duck, but what could be? It's close. We'll get
I don't know. It's very hard for me to remember anything in Howard the Duck, but I hope you guys like that video because we're never revisiting that movie again. Anyway, as we know, September is the beginning of spooky season, but we're staying away from horror movies so we could take a little break. And so today we're covering 1995's Johnny Mnenomic, directed by Robert Logo. Cool
Longo.
name. It was written by very famous sci-fi and specifically like tech punk, neo-noir, cyberpunk author William Gibson. This is the only movie I think, I'll double check right now, but it's the only movie that he wrote and he's adapting his own story. Like a lot of his other stories have been covered, but they haven't. But he didn't work on the actual screenplay. We'll see how that turned out. Keanu Reeves stars as Johnny Keanu Reeves stars as him guessing that The Matrix is going to be a hit and just picking any movie that seemed like The Matrix. Dolph Lundgren is in this in his best role, maybe. Diane Mayer is in this in her worst role. Ice-T is in this. In his, like, it's pretty on par for the course for you, Ice-T.
He's J-Bone.
Of course, Uter Kier is in this because he's in every sci-fi movie ever. And then our favorite actor of all time, glasses wearing Henry Rollins, who looks
and Beat Takashi's in it too. He's probably the best actor in this, if you think about it.
Yeah, it's hard to think when this movie is on. So this movie is about Josh. Go ahead, tell us. This is your pick.
Oh man. Okay, and let's get this out of the way. You nor I had ever seen this movie, right?
I think I might have saw this as a small child, like in the background, but no, I have never really seen it.
So we were gonna. This is one of those. Oh, I've always been interested, but never did it. So let's just watch it blind for the podcast. It's bad. It is about. Keanu Reeves, Johnny Mnemonic himself, is a data courier who puts data in his head to like smuggle to like someone who wants to buy it. But then something goes wrong and there's very important data in his head and he doesn't know what it is and everyone's kind of trying to get it, and then that's kind of what the movie's about. um,
Also, a funny tidbit, and this will be like the only trivia for this movie, is that William Gibson famously claimed that the they did not adapt it correctly, and they did a bad job of adapting his story. What he forgets to tell you is that he's credited as the sole screenwriter on this movie. You
well,
can't
okay,
blame yourself. That's an
this
Andrew
is
move.
this is not a good movie, but I will say part of the problem is it looks like just a 90s action movie and not like the good version of this is The Matrix.
Right, right.
Like The Matrix is like a perfect movie,
And I
but
think, well, see, the main issue with me in this movie is like if you watch it, it's almost like this is kind of what cyberpunk movies were like before the Matrix. Like the Matrix figured out a way
yeah,
so that everyone can understand what's going. Like if you think about the Matrix, or you think about the plot of this movie, Johnny plays like they give him like implants in his head so he can steal like secrets from corporations because the whole world is. Before we get to that, let me just say at the beginning they have a Star Wars style
oh
scroll
yeah, it's so
that's
long and full of information.
that's like kind of broken down the world and stuff. A, it's the longest one I've ever seen in my whole life. And B, it has this filter on it where the letters are like shooting at you, making it almost unreadable. For 2 minutes, you're trying to like figure out what it is and your eyes hurt. I'll say like this movie, I saw it last night and I was a little bit high as shit. And I was like, halfway through, I was like, what the hell is going on in this
It
movie?
doesn't. I
And
was
then
sober. It doesn't matter.
this morning, I watched it again because I felt like it was unfair for me to judge this film.
Okay.
And halfway through, I was like, oh no, it wasn't being high. This movie is just like, it's not even that it doesn't make sense. It's that like things just kind of happen and like no one really seems to care. But like the Matrix, like if you think about this movie, it's like this guy, he sells corporations, they're trying to get it. There's like a virus, and then like they can cure it. It sounds very complicated for it's essentially a chase movie. But then you think about the Matrix, and it's like, oh, the real world isn't the real world. We're actually in a dream that's been put together by robots because they took over and they've created a computer program that we all live in. But then some
Yeah.
of us can escape, and there's a resistance. It's like that movie is so complicated. And as a matter of fact, I saw it the first time because my brother went to go see it and he explained the entire plot to me. And I was like, there's no way that's the plot of a movie. And so that's how I got to see it. But like, you think about the Matrix, and what makes the Matrix so good is it takes these super complicated ideas and it doesn't simplify them, but it makes them so that the regular audience can kind of see them.
Yeah,
And it's like, wow.
it almost piecemeals it out to you, where you're like you kind of learn what's happening as Neo does. Whereas this movie not only gives you like they're like here's 12 different factions at the beginning. The first like 30 minutes of the movie is just people explaining like the world of the movie,
Yeah.
and you're just like, is there a plot or is this just like people like doing Wikipedia articles on this like cyberpunk world?
My only notes are just about the opening crawl. But one thing I will point out, and it comes up in the movie, one thing that I love about cyberpunk, especially from white writers, is that for some reason all of them thought that the Yakuza was going to play a
Yeah.
global, like
It's
a
all
global part
Asia.
in everything. Like, no, Asia I understand because Asia's a huge population, but the idea that the Yakuza would become so powerful that they're like in contention with like Microsoft is only something that white cyberpunk sci-fi authors
That's
thought
like,
was possible.
and that's definitely because I will say like I'm a huge fan of like Neuromancer, like William Gibson's novels, but I
Yeah.
think almost the issue with that is when you're writing a novel, you can just like in a paragraph be like, oh yeah, and here's like 50 different complicated things that don't matter but are cool to like think about. But it's like, well, in a movie we have to see that, and when your budget is
Right.
like SNL skit, it's not going to look good or feel good. But I also think too, like, this is going to sound weird, but the lighting is a problem. Like, you think
Yeah.
about like the Matrix. You know the scene in the Matrix where Neo's being interrogated by Agent Smith before anything cool happens.
Mm-hmm.
The lighting in that scene is better than the lighting in this whole movie. Like,
Right.
this movie has no mood, no tone.
Yeah.
It's weird because that's like cyberpunk
It's
lives or dies on tone.
And
You
I
know.
think like it's especially funny because you think about like in the Matrix, like I said, how do they make it digestible for modern audiences? And one of the smartest things they do is once Neo wakes up in the real world, everyone's has a shaved head, and their clothes are completely different. And so like visually, I can tell right away when Neo is in the fake world and when he's in the Matrix and when he's in the real world. But in and they do even explain it just for some of the audience members. But here, like so much of it just looks like LA in the 90s that it's like it's my brain is just telling me this is a normal LA thing. So then every once in a while they'll bring in like a cyberpunk thing and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's weird." And so like your brain never really accepts the world because the plot and the budget didn't allow you to accept
Eh,
the world, you know?
Yeah. Also, we should say it takes place in Newark for some reason.
Yeah.
And it actually was filmed in Toronto, which is where most stuff is filmed,
Also,
which is
just
why it
set it
looks
in
like.
Toronto.
I know, it's such a like weird sticking point.
Also it takes place in 2021, so 4 years ago. Thanks, Donald Trump, another
That was
failure.
funny during the opening crawl because it's like a plague has ravaged the world. It's like, damn, you got that right.
I know.
You
Way to
did.
go.
Um,
But I
no,
think like it's
it's
just
yeah.
oh god.
No, it just like it also like kind of part of the issue too is Keanu. Well, one, this does not play to Keanu's strengths, which is not
I did want to talk about that.
acting.
Well,
It's
see, okay, so his character and like I know we're not really talking about the plot, but the movie barely talks about the plot. So his character, like every time he like gets corporate stuff, depending on how big of gigabytes it is, also it's like 300 gigabytes, which is hilarious. Um,
I know.
However big his gigabytes is, like just in reference, sci-fi authors like your brain does like 2 billion terabytes like every second. Like we would be able to have. It doesn't matter. So like he
Yeah.
in his brain he has like they like fill it up with corporate secrets, and what happens is sometimes if it's too big, he has to take out parts of his memory. And so I know what they were thinking by hiring Keanu Reeves, being like, oh, he's kind of like a little bit like he can play very cold very well, like in John Wick and stuff. But you need someone, and like the other role that Keanu Reeves can play is like Wilderman, like in The Matrix. But you need someone who's like almost overly emotional because like
Yeah, like a neurotic.
there's a part where he's like talking to Diana Meyer plays a bodyguard that's been hired to protect him for some reason. Also, she's cyborg, but like you don't ever know, or you can't ever tell. But anyway,
Yeah.
she's like at one point he tells her that he's had to get rid of his entire childhood to um to fit all this information in, and it's like being held. And so you need someone like almost like Matthew McConaughey in Interstellar, not his character, but like or the character, not the actual Matthew McConaughey, where it's like he kind of has to be overly emotional because he's fighting to keep like these memories. But if you have someone who's playing like a cold person, then it's like, well, why does he care? He doesn't even seem to have emotions. Like, what
Yeah,
does he want
yeah,
to?
they give him like in the last like the very almost the end of the movie, like the last 30 minutes. By the way, this movie's 96 minutes. It feels like 2.5 hours, but
It really does.
near the end of the movie, he has this like big breakdown where he's like, "I don't
Wow.
want this. I just want room service and like a
Yeah.
nice cold beer." And it's like, one, he hasn't shown any emotion up to this point, so this just doesn't land. It's like this should have happened in the first 30 minutes of the movie when he's like freaking out about his life. But you can't just be like, oh, by the way, here's his characterization at the end of the
Yeah, at the
film.
very end. And I think like that
Yeah.
happens because that whole thing about him losing his memory, it's kind of mentioned, but it's not mentioned as like he cares about that until halfway through. And it's like, oh, is that what he's fighting for? I thought he just wanted cash.
And
Um,
they also kind of do the thing where you find out the secret in his head, but it's kind of one of those things where you're like, oh, I could see why this would be important, but you didn't really build on this idea enough. for it to
See,
connect.
and that's one of the biggest issues too, is it has that problem where they introduce like this virus, but we don't really see the effects of the virus, especially because they're filming in the most crowded areas of LA possible. Um, and so like when
Toronto,
they're
but yeah.
like, or Toronto, yeah, when they're like, hey, we're going to like it's a cure for the virus. It's like, okay, I mean, do people really care? They seem to be living with it, you know? Like,
Yeah, well, yeah, and like it is like because Henry Rollins like is playing this hacker named Spider, who's
yeah,
also secretly a doctor. As part, everyone's backstory is very complicated
yeah,
and does not matter, but he kind of gives a speech here to be like, "This is why this is important." It's like, again, you should have been showing me this
yeah.
like the whole time, not at the end of the movie to be like, "Here's what this movie's about." Finally,
Yeah. And see,
it's
like, yeah,
yeah,
it's just such a weird. Like, I think if you had even had like Kurt Russell, probably could have done a great job on this. Um,
I could see
I
it.
could see Bill Paxton doing it.
Yeah,
Like,
but
you needed that everyday man who kind of looks at the job as just a job, and then he slowly learns like that he's losing his memories. You know, he had to get rid of this, and then he can't like he might not be able to get them back. Like, that's what you should have had in here, not.
but like it's not even almost like even with good actors because almost every actor and this kind of reminds me of you know in Saw if you've ever if you remember watching Saw and then you're like is all the dialogue in every take kind of bad and you
Mhm.
find out oh they literally ran out of money so they had to use like one take like and it was the
No, they
first
were
take.
using the rehearsals, which is even worse.
Okay, yeah, and this almost felt like because almost every line of dialogue feels like the actor is saying it for the first time and
Yeah.
just read it off the script. Like there's a scene very early on where he's getting the memory thing, where he's in a room with a bunch of like Asian businessmen, and the yakuza like run in and start shooting people, and everyone's like, "Look out! Oh, let's get this!" And you're like, they seem confused about the lines they're reading, and it really does feel like one take, move on,
And
or
also
just yeah.
like when there's like a part where because like they don't do anything to make you like really connect with Johnny, and so like later when you find
Yeah.
out there's a cure for this virus, like there's that thing. It should be like this moment where Johnny has to decide like he might die to give it up, but like he'll save everyone else. And he's like kind of selfish at the beginning, and you're supposed to like kind of relate to him, but like there's nothing relatable about this guy. So you're like, oh, so he's just a terrible person? Like,
Yeah, it's not even the like, oh, he's like a lovable scumbag because he
yeah,
doesn't have enough personality to be a
right.
lovable. He's just a guy,
You know
you
what?
know.
You know what they were looking for is they were looking for Clive Owen in Children of Men, like this character who's cold
Yeah.
and who's done with it, but he still like cares about humanity and loves people. It's just that they've shown him nothing but contempt. And that's what you need from this character, not like someone who's just kind of go with the flow, whatever, bro. Like it
He's
just doesn't work.
just a guy. Yeah, and they kind of have his bodyguard, the girl, like playing off him, but she's also just kind of neutrally aggressive in every scene, so it also just doesn't really
And
work.
she should be cold. Like she should be the one who's cold and doesn't understand
Yeah.
why he cares about like saving everyone. But instead, she's also like she also doesn't really care. It's like
Yeah, it is because and this is kind of a staple of like William Gibson like novels is there's always kind of a tough cybernetic bodyguard chick and it's clearly like his thing. And if you've ever seen he did two notoriously bad X-Files episodes, one which takes place in cyberspace where it's a tough like leather jacket video game woman trying to kill Mulder and it's like, "Oh, this is clearly his like specific fixation." And it's like, but she barely fits into this movie because she barely does anything. And it just seemed like one of those where he's like, well, I have to put a tough like girl in every movie. And
yeah,
it's like, yeah, but she's not part of the plot and she's not, and it's, this movie's really frustrating because you see a good version of it. Like,
yeah. I saw a good version 1999. It was called The Matrix.
exactly.
And
Like
I think
Trinity is that,
and it's so funny because well at the very beginning they put her like in they kind of whiten her face and they put her in makeup so that she looks more cybernetic, and then like the next scene she's just like they just took all that off and they like have her wake up in a towel, and then she just has like an armband that's like kind of looks metallic, so like that's how you know it's a robot, I guess. But like the other thing is like in this movie, like even in the Matrix, I'm sorry we keep comparing it to the Matrix, but of course,
I
in the
mean, it
Matrix,
is. Yeah.
he knows who he's like trying to find uh Morpheus, and then he like meets Trinity, and he knows who Trinity is. And then like there's that scene where they're like follow the right rabbit, and then he talks to that guy. He's like, "Hey man, you should come party with us. You're my client. We clearly know each other. We have an established relationship." In this movie, like everyone he meets, he's kind of meeting for the first time, or they have no idea what's happening. And then like people are just kind of helping him for no real reason. Like Ice T is just like he just helps them, and then he's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I just happen to be very involved in whatever you're also involved in." And it's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's a pretty good coincidence." Okay.
Yeah, like I think he literally just stumbles across Ice-T in a building, and
No,
Ice-T's like, "Hey, man."
it's when he like gets he's gonna get like he's getting beat up or something. Ice T kills him. He's like,
Yeah,
"It's me, Ice
he's
T."
gonna go like get the data out. Every time he's trying to get the stuff out of his head, someone tries to kill him, but Ice-T's just there, like seeing it. He's not
Yeah.
part of the deal.
No, he just happens to be there and he's like, "Oh, I'll help, I guess." And then he's like, "Oh, that's cool. Like it's the same. We're doing the same shit." Like I think of another movie to not compare it to like one of the best movies of all time, but even The Running Man, you know, Arnold
Yeah,
doesn't. We should have done The Running Man. That's what we should have done. Arnold, like, he doesn't care about the resistance or whatever. I mean, and at the beginning they established like he cares like in a very broad way, like he wants people to be free and for us not. He understands that there's the society is like terrible, but he doesn't care enough to put himself at risk. Like he knows in his head, he's so discouraged with the way the future is. He's like, "Oh, I'm not gonna help you guys because it's pointless." And then so you have other characters that are part of the resistance, and eventually all their needs happen to mesh together. That's kind of what this movie is going for, except the way they run into each other makes no sense, and the way they would know each other. It's kind of like in the Running Man, you know, his friends end up in the game because they kidnapped them because they're friends, and so
right.
he's like, "Oh, okay, now I have to help the resistance because we're all just trying to get out of here alive." And there's even a point where like one of the guys is like hacking into something, and then the girl who's with him is like, "We need to go. Like, I don't give a shit about this at all." And like, but you need those kind of like different ideas where everyone in here is like, "Hey, I'm this guy," and you're like, "You want to die with us?" And he's like, "I guess so. I'm here already." And it's like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, and like weirdly, no one has a strong personality, despite them almost being described as having one. In fact, the only person with a strong personality is Dolph Lundgren because he's like a
yes.
cartoon
And
character,
see, and that's
and
what
he
I want
does
to.
not matter in this movie
That's what
either.
I want to talk about. Is Dolph Lundgren, despite everyone doing a terrible job, Dolph Lundgren is so good in this movie for no real reason because he's like the only one who's like everyone else is just playing a normal dude who happens to be in a sci-fi set, but Dolph Lundgren is playing an assassin who's like super religious,
He's
but
a
he's
super religious cyborg with the worst wig of all time.
and he has like a beard, so he's almost unrecognizable. And then until he talks, and then he's like, yeah, he has like every time they cut to him, he's like in a room that's just filled with crosses and swords, and there's like candles, and he's like, "I love the God," and it's like, can we make this movie about that dude?
And he will only like kill people with either like crosses or by crucifying. Like it's
Yeah.
always religious based,
And
and
every
it's
time he like puts his hand in his shirt, it's like Wacko where he pulls out a bigger knife. Like, how are you don't have a shirt on, you just have a trench coat. How do you have so many knives in there?
it's like
It's like
and like
machete.
like at one point, yeah, Johnny Mnemonic like meets with Henry Owens, like, let's go, we gotta get out of here, and he just steps in front of their car. He's like, "Stop,
And
sinners!"
he
And they
does
just
yeah.
run over him, and
And
it's
he
like
does the crucifix.
more of this. This
Yeah.
should be the film.
Yeah, and then at the very end, he has the coolest skeleton ever, and then they're like, throw it in the ocean. And it's like, but he's not. Oh, so you're saying, like, okay, so you have this corporation. Also, there's a part where Johnny Mnemonic is like, they're like, hey, they're going to kill you and take the thing in your head. And he's like, they're not going to kill me. It's a corporation. And I was like, oh, Johnny, you're still this naive?
I know. How is he like dumb and worldly? I don't
we
know.
our pandemic wasn't even as bad as yours, and we're not that naive. But like, I don't know. Like he feels so well. You think like, okay, it's this religious cyborg who like can like the corporations can barely control him, but they set him loose just because they're running out of options to show the corporations eventually like do not care about even regular harm, like collateral damage.
Yeah,
And
he's
you
almost the Anton Chigurh, or he should have been the Anton Chigurh of
yeah,
this
so you're
movie.
like,
You
that's a
know?
great villain for this movie. But the main villain is just like a Yakuza guy who's the
Yeah, it
boringest
just
old man ever, you
it
know?
it keeps cutting back to Beat Takashi, great actor, Battle Royale, Yakuza 6, great. But all he does in this movie is like sit in his office and like look at old videos of his dead daughter, and then like a robot ghost talks to him, and I still don't really know what like his role in this is, because
And
he
and
shows up
then
at the end to die immediately. Like he doesn't
yeah.
do anything,
There's
you
a lot
know.
of like him being like just having like smart aleck lines, but since we don't really even know what his role is or what he's doing, it's kind of like okay. Which is
Yeah.
not the case with Dolph Lundgren. Every line he makes is great.
They kind of try to make like he has this like second in command who has this like laser fiber wire in his like thumb that he'll like cut off people's heads with and stuff. And you're like, this is a cool idea, but every action scene in this movie is so bad it just like doesn't work, you know? Again, it's like again, if this was the
I
Matrix,
I
that would
will
be great.
say one of the things apparently that they said about this movie is that it was originally more of a sci-fi drama, but then after the success of Speed, Keanu Reeves' other hit, Keanu Reeves, like people talk about how Keanu Reeves is not a famous actor, but he has like 8 franchises that he was just a part of. But yeah, they're like, oh, after the success of Speed, they like had him rewrite it so it was more action packed. But also like, why wasn't this movie action packed already? Like, why were you making a sci-fi drama that's essentially a very long chase scene? You know?
Well, you know, it's funny because one of the you actually hate this movie, and I don't, but I understand why it's bad. Another William Gibson adaptation that he didn't adapt was New Rose Hotel. That movie has no action in it and no plot. It is just vibes, and I would argue it's a better movie for it, even though it still doesn't really work. You know,
Yeah, New Rose Hotel is just kind of there, but it
it's
has the
just
same
people
problem.
hanging out in hotel
Yeah, we're
rooms.
like halfway through. I was like, wait, is this supposed to be in the future? What the fuck? Um,
But I
and
almost
like,
feel like because this movie doesn't have the budget to be super futuristic, but it wanted to. Like, it's weird where this movie spends money because near the end, they're like, "Oh, we need to meet Ice T on his like bridge fortress,"
yeah,
and there's multiple scenes of a car being dropped and exploding. And you're like, this clearly costs money, but why didn't any of the costumes cost money? Like,
right, right.
you
Well, and
know,
like,
like,
but see, I feel like that's such a weird like. I understand that the filmmakers are doing it, but I also understand like you look at I think of the first movie I think of when I look at this movie is kind of Looper or District 9 or even Elysium, where like all those movies like they had very small budgets, but they had to show some kind of future. So what's it? Looper, they went to Hong Kong and they said it was like London or something. Um,
yeah, like
Elysium,
smart.
they filmed in Mexico City, and they said it was L.A. And they're like, "Oh, L.A. at this time has become this vast area of nothing," you know, which is Mexico City. And so it's like there was creative ways to like make this movie look more futuristic. Even the Matrix, to a point, like even the scenes in the Matrix, it never really feels like a real city, and it's just the way they filmed it. And so, I mean, it definitely has a lot to do with the lighting. But I'm sure there are even locations in Toronto where they could have. I mean, that RoboCop was filmed in Dallas to make it look like they went for those scenes, and a lot of those scenes look good. Logan's Run was filmed also, I think, in Dallas or Houston. But the same way, like they were like they have a style. This
Kind of
movie, it's just
this
kind of
urban
like
sprawl. Yeah,
yeah. And so I'm like, there was ways for you guys to make this look more expensive, but instead you were like, now let's just rent one warehouse in Canada and turn every like this movie is so
yeah.
annoying because like okay, so then Ice T they run around for a long time, and then they get to the thing and they're like, oh, it's a dolphin. There we trained dolphins and we gave them cybernetic enhancements so that they could like detect weapons, and it's like dolphins can already do that. You don't need to give them cybernetic. And then they're like, oh, and then we kept one, and he's gonna like hack your brain or whatever. But it's like at this point, I'm like so checked out. But also, like, they don't even do a cool thing with the dolphin. It just sits there and
Yeah,
just
they
kind of
had
makes
enough money
dolphin.
to make it be in
Yeah.
the set, but it's not gonna do much. You know, this almost like we've made a lot of comparisons to The Matrix, but I would almost argue this movie, exposition wise and kind of like plot not really working wise, is almost like what if The Matrix Reloaded didn't have any good action scenes?
Hmm.
Where you're just like, what? Okay, now they're in a room. Now they're talking to this guy, but they have to go somewhere. There's really no like plot in the Matrix 2.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
very just like, oh, this looks really good, and this is almost like, oh, what if that movie had nothing going for it?
Yeah.
That's this.
Well,
You
The
know.
Matrix 2 with nothing going on for it is called The Matrix Revolutions. Um, but I think
This
like
movie
yeah,
reminded me of it. There's like a robot bird that was very much like the
I know.
stupid dolphin of this.
It's
You
also
know.
funny because I watched like I finally finished The Stand, the original TV movie by Mark Garris, and it has the same problem where there was a lot of stuff in there, as in this movie, where I was like, I bet you this would be really cool in the book, but in on TV or on like watching it as a movie, it looks very stupid. Like you didn't figure out how to do this, and you just kind of went for it. And so like that, like the dolphin, it should be cool, but the way they had to do it, it's just kind of like another idea that they should like. There's a scene later in the movie where like some dude's head, it's like just a guard, but his head gets cut off with a laser
Yeah.
whip, and I was like, where the hell have you been all movie? Like, why is this barely happening? And then there's another guard with that guard, and he's like, hey, what happened? What happened to you? Did you get a hit? And he turns around and he doesn't get killed with the laser whip, and it's like, what are you guys doing? What's
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah, even like stuff where you're like, oh, this would be fun if they did this. And a lot of times you're just like, well, why didn't you have a better shot for this like action moment?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just the shots, the lighting. It's very amateurish. I don't know. It's so frustrating because you're like, if everything in this movie was like 30% better, it would be
Yeah, and I think
good.
like that's the thing. Like if they had just kind of incorporated more of the stuff and even got rid of some of the stuff, like so many characters are superfluous and could have been mixed into two characters or into one character, so that you had more time to do more stuff. And I like that's not to say like I was looking for a super huge action movie. I mean, another movie that does this is Blade Runner, and Blade Runner is just about the worst detective of all time blundering his way across the future. And that movie's great. Like there's not really even any action in Blade Runner. I mean, there's a lot of Deckard getting
Yeah,
punched in the face,
or
but that's
running.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so like but you don't realize it because like you're so interested and invested in what's going on. And sometimes even if you're not, Blade Runner just looks so cool that you want to like live in that world. And a lot of that is lighting because they also filmed on a set for a lot of it. But like this movie, like it doesn't have anything. It looks like it's filmed on a TV show. Oh, and that's what I was gonna say. Like the biggest problem is Dolph Lundgren because Dolph Lundgren's character is the only character in the whole movie that's at the level that it needs to be at for you to buy this world. Like
yeah,
because the like Yakuza guy, like he'll sometimes use his laser whip, but not always, and it clearly like takes you out of it because you're like, why wouldn't you use your laser whip on the very next guy? Where like Dolph Lundgren, even to the point where it's detrimental to his quest, will always be a crazed religious cyborg guy
yeah.
in this movie, and like that's why I buy him, and that's why I'm most invested in his story because everyone else just feels like an actor playing a role, and he actually feels like he's encompassing the
Yeah,
role.
you almost needed, yeah, like Dolph Lundgren comes in almost like in the first 30 minutes. Keanu Reeves is like a neurotic, the bodyguard's the badass who has to protect him, so you
Right.
almost have like a fun dynamic where he's like running in action scenes and she's doing all the stuff, but they're both just kind of generically good at fighting.
Yeah.
It
And I
just,
think like if there had been like
yeah.
more like emphasis, like maybe he meets his sister or someone and he doesn't even recognize her because his memory is just gone on that. Or maybe like he's trying to remember something like in Eternal Sunshine and like it keeps changing characters because like his thing is all messed up. Or even like he could have huge headaches. I don't know, like something to make you think that this is a problem. Like, in Escape from New York, which is another great cyberpunk movie. You like he has like they inject Snake Plissken with a virus that's going to kill him in 12 hours, so he has to get back in that time. And like he's constantly like coughing, or like at one point he like keels over because the virus is like getting more a hold of him. I think it's a poison. But anyway, there's like signs that he's running out of time. Like, why give him that ticking time bomb to quote save the cat if you're not going to like implement it in any way? You know, even in The Matrix, a movie we haven't mentioned this whole pod, they have like 12 hours to save Morpheus or they're boned. Like they give them a timeline, but then you have the robots coming in, you have Cyrus turning on them,
Yeah,
and it's
the
like,
stakes are clear.
yeah.
You know,
And in
in this.
here, this it's not that the stakes aren't clear; it's that we don't see the repercussions. Like we don't see the effects of the virus. We don't see what the thing is doing to Johnny Mnemonic's brain. It's all just explained to us, but we never visually see it. And William Gibson, I don't know if you know this, but films are visual, and it helps when we can see things.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if you read like one of his novels, you're like, oh, he's so evocative the way he paints this world, and to do it right, it would cost like $200 million, and they're just
Right.
never going to make that movie. So it's just, I don't know. It's almost like you're failing before you start. You know?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it is tough. It is a super future world, but I just think there's movies that are made for cheaper, better,
No, I
that sort
agree.
of like copied it. But yeah,
I
the
mean,
good thing is I would watch it just for Dolph Lundgren and to see a cool puppet of a dolphin, even though it doesn't really move. And also, it's kind of funny to watch this movie because it does star Keanu Reeves. It stars Neo, and it's like, oh, dude, were you just trying to be in every cyberpunk movie? Like, what the hell?
It's good. Yeah, I was gonna say. Obviously, if you want to watch the best Keanu Reeves cyberpunk movie, you watch The Matrix. But if you want to watch a Keanu Reeves near future movie made for no money that's pretty good, watch A Scanner Darkly. That's
Yeah,
also that's a good
it's a good one
choice.
too. Yeah, I forgot that he did a third one. Jesus, Keanu
He
Reeves.
really does love cyberpunk
I like it.
movies.
And that's the thing. I mean, it's hard to hate on Keanu Reeves because he like one of the actors who it's like him and Winona Ryder, which they're best friends, so that makes even more sense. Where like if they could just sit at their house all day and watch movies, they would do that. So which is good
Yeah.
because that they end up like loving the movies they're in. And so like it's hard to disparage on Keanu. That's why I'll never talk about him being like a bad actor. I'll just say that this role did not fit for him.
Yeah, it's like they did not play to his
Yeah.
strengths. It's very much a Bram Stoker situation where you're like, hey, you're not giving him anything
And
that he can work with,
and
you
we're
know.
we're kind of wrapping up, but I do think that that's kind of a funny thing they did to Matthew McConaughey too, where they like there was a long period of time like after Speed and before The Matrix where they didn't really know what Keanu Reeves' strengths were, so they would just put him into every role. Same thing with Matthew McConaughey, and that's why you get him in these weird movies like this one or Speed even. Or like the romantic comedies they both did. It's like, all right, you could be here, I guess.
Yeah, it's like, isn't a handsome guy? Let's try it.
Yeah. When
Who
they should have
cares?
known that all he wants to do is say sarcastic lines and do some form of martial arts.
Yeah, really just hone
That's
in on
really his
that.
bag, yeah, and we love him for it. But yeah, I mean, this movie I wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless you're like a diehard Keanu or Cyberpunk fan, or if you're a William Gibson fan. I would say watch this and be like,
I would
"What's
almost
going
say
on?"
watch this and New Rose Hotel to be like, oh, these are both failures of William Gibson adaptations, but in completely separate ways. Like where
Yeah,
you're like they just went in
for very
opposite
different reasons.
directions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. It wasn't like I didn't hate myself or anything, but it was very rough to get through. It's a very kind of
It
tedious
feels
one.
longer than it is.
But
It's
yeah,
not great. Yeah.
but I'll never say to not watch a movie. Like I hate. Well, it's always funny when people on Twitter are like, "Should I watch this movie?" It's like, yeah, it's an hour and a half. Just watch it. Like it's
Yeah.
not,
What
you can
you're
stop
just
watching it after a while if you don't
you're
really
just
like
gonna
it.
be checking Twitter anyway. Come on,
Yeah.
man. Just put it on.
So yeah, and next week we might have a guest. Who knows? And then we're all just. It's all. This is all filler until Halloween.
I, yeah, let's getting back to horror at some
Yeah,
point.
this is the Bomb Squad's version of Eclipse Show. So enjoy it, guys. This is when we have the most fun.
This is the Riker has the brain virus that makes
Yeah.
him revisit old clips.
This is our cyberpunk Lost in the Internet X Files episode. But yeah, so we'll see you guys next time on the Bomb Squad.